Yeah,
You
to be
know?
precise, he's about 20 years younger in
Yeah.
the real photo. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
But that's remarkable. Like it looks so close.
yeah, yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted to like put that up for people to see because that just
And
blew my mind.
I'm hoping in the future we'll find more real photos of him. That photo, while it's good, is kind of disappointing in some ways because it's so low resolution. It
Yeah.
would be nice. It would be nice to find a better photo of him in much higher resolution.
And the
You can
light's
really,
kind of severe on his face, so you can't really see the details in his eyes and
you
stuff
can
like that.
really, because in the Somerton Man autopsy photo, you can see he's got a very small mole above his lip. It would be
Uh,
nice to have the kind of resolution where you could actually see that on the real picture.
Mystery videos have been a pretty solid performer on my channel for a while now, and some of the most popular ones involve unidentified bodies. People who have washed up on beaches or found in mountain passes with no identification on them, and a litany of confusing and mysterious clues that only serve to conjure up crazy theories around their deaths. Ties to the mob, spies, jilted lovers, death wishes, that kind of thing. Most of these videos come out, they tell the story, and that's pretty much the end of it because we don't get any updates, so there's nothing really else to talk about. This is not true in the case of the Somerton Man. I did a video on that story back in March, and then I did another one in July because the identity of the Somerton Man had finally been discovered after more than 70 years. And that is because of today's guest, Derek Abbott. Derek is a professor of electrical engineering at the University of Adelaide in Australia, and about 15 years ago or so, he, stumbled upon the Somerton Man case and, well, kind of got obsessed with solving it. And along the way, through many twists and turns and legal hurdles, and with some help from a genetic researcher named Colleen Fitzpatrick, he finally sussed out the name of the Somerton Man, one Carl Charles Webb. And through the magic of the internet, I was able to sit down with Derek and talk in detail about how they went through researching this, the crazy advances in DNA forensics that made it possible, and what it's like to solve a 70-year-old mystery. Now, I will say that if you're completely new to the Somerton Man case, I recommend you watch my video on it first, or any video really. There's plenty of good ones out there, because we do just kind of jump into this one. But if you are at all familiar with the story, I think you'll get a real kick out of this. I know I did. And with all that out of the way, let's just jump into my conversation with Derek Abbott. I guess I'll just jump in with the big question. Is this thing solved? Like, is it officially solved? Can you say that?
Well, you have to define what you mean by solved. If you mean, have we found the guy's name? The answer is yes.
Hmm.
If you mean, do we know what happened and how he died? The answer is absolutely no. We have no idea.
Okay. So there's still a lot of
So,
questions.
and there's a lot of gray areas in between.
Yeah.
So, I like to say to people that finding his name is a great achievement, but it's really, in a sense, is the beginning of the journey, not the end.
Mm-hmm.
Because now we have to unfold all the details of his life that we can find at least,
Yeah.
and try to get some idea of what he was doing.
Yeah. Well, so I imagine anybody that's listening to this knows the story, but just in case somebody doesn't know the story of the Somerton Man, can you give your little elevator pitch on the whole mystery? You're the expert. I'll
Oh,
let you do it.
the brief summary is that a guy was found dead on the beach here in Adelaide, Australia, in 1948, and for over 70 years he was unidentified, and no one knew his name, no one knew his cause of death. There wasn't a scratch on his body. He was found nicely dressed. His toenails and fingernails were nicely clipped and cleaned. He was clean shaven. So he was not a drifter. He looked well to do. And yeah, it was a mystery.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the mystery, that it went by for so long with no identification. But spoiler alert, we do have an identification now.
Yay.
We know his name.
Well, I started to ask you this before we started recording, but I am curious, like how are you feeling right now? Like, I mean, how you've been working like 20 years you've been working on this, right?
No, I think about 15
Oh,
years.
just
I
15.
think,
Okay.
yeah. remember now. I think it was 2007 I started
Uh-huh.
working on this. So is that 15?
I
It's
guess
my
it,
my
yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
my subtraction isn't that great.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay, exactly 15. And in the grand scheme of things, that's not really that long. Like in my normal research that I do in math and engineering and physics and that sort of stuff, I have published papers that have taken me 15 years.
Oh, okay.
So that's actually my maximum. So 15 years is my going rate for a tough problem.
Yeah. Well, I know that for me, whenever finally, and maybe you're not at the end of this, like you said, it's really just the beginning of a lot more questions. But there's I can imagine you feeling some euphoria, but at the same time, a little bit like, oh, a little bit of like, I don't know, like it's all over now, what kind of thing?
No,
Not at
not
all.
at all, because the reality is it's not over.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
There's still a lot of mystery to solve in this case. Whether I will personally be engaged in that all the way through, I don't know.
Mm.
I have other things to do,
Sure. Yeah.
other pastures to go on to. So I may stick around a little while, and but I may move on
Mm.
and start looking at other projects.
Well, so
Another
okay.
if you're interested, the fun thing I'm looking at the moment is the Voynich manuscript. Have you heard of that?
Okay. So, man, you jumped right ahead to the end of this whole podcast. I was going to ask if there was any new mysteries you wanted to work on or anything. I didn't know if that was if this was going to be it and you were done, or if this is like starting a whole new chapter of
No,
Scooby Doo crime solving.
I've been working on the Voynich for quite a few years
Oh
now,
wow, cool.
and yeah, uh, just to try and figure out, is this actually a language or not?
Uh-huh.
Is it fake? And can we differentiate letters from numbers even in this
Mm-hmm.
in this text? So, well, in case people don't know what the Voynich is that are listening, it's a 14th century manuscript, and to this day, no one knows what language it's in, and even what it says. So
Mm.
that's a real mystery. I think this is going to be a lot harder than the Somerton Man.
I've covered it before in a video. It's a fascinating story.
But I've got some ideas, and we're
Yeah.
working on it. Yeah,
Well, okay. I would
I've
love to
even
circle back around to this, but we got a lot of Somerton Man stuff to talk about first.
yeah,
I don't want to lose too much of it. But one thing I did want to ask, if you don't mind me jumping back to the Somerton Man stuff, I'm sure you might be tired of talking about it at this point. I don't know, but
that's fine.
um, so the police have not officially like closed the case or anything, right?
Yeah, so it's actually not up to the police; it's the coroner who makes the
Okay.
final official announcement. And I think the report to the coroner to enable him to do that's probably going to happen shortly after Christmas. So
Okay.
I think, provided he's not too busy, we will see this happen early next year.
Okay.
If he's very busy, it might take 6 months. Who knows?
Yeah. He has new cases to deal with.
Well, he has a backlog of 2 years of cases because of COVID, and
Oh wow.
the coroner's court was, not operating
Okay.
because we were kind of trying to not socialize at that time.
Yeah.
But yeah, because this is not actually having to go through a court as such, but just has to be a decision he makes after reading a report. Hopefully, it will be not take 2 years. I'm
Mhm.
crossing my fingers.
Well, so let me make sure my facts are straight here. So I know that you worked for a while to get the body exhumed, right?
Mm,
And they did do that, but then you were able to take the DNA from the plaster cast.
yeah.
Did anything actually come from the body being examined, or
Uh, well, I assume so, because if it wasn't going to happen, I would have found out about it by now. But
yeah?
I assume that's gone well, and it looks like the police are going to make the report soon, and it's going to all come out matching.
Okay.
But they haven't officially said that yet.
Well, I guess my take on it, just kind of like, following along, I was like, oh my God, he spent all those years to get the body exhumed, and then it turned out you didn't even need to. You were able to make it work with what you already had. With
Uh,
the
well, if it was up to just me, I would say, hey, we don't need to have the dug up the body, or we can just do it with the hair. But to follow all the protocols and check that the hair really does match with the body, etc., etc. So
That's true.
for some people, they want to see it go the whole way. So digging up the body was not wasted from that point of view.
So, what about some
And
of the other? Oh, go ahead. I'm
and
sorry.
there are all sorts of conspiracy theorists who say there was a body swap and the real body was never buried and all this kind of stuff. So maybe you have to go this extra mile and check that the hair matches the body, because then you have to say, well, if there was a body swap, then how do you explain that the DNA in the hair from the bust matches the body?
Yeah.
So there couldn't have been a body swap.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. It have multiple,
Yeah.
like, what's the word I'm looking for? Never mind. Makes sense. I get it.
The motivation to a body swap is like really weird. It's so out there. I wouldn't even consider that as a possibility myself.
Yeah. But we're pretty sure that it was a likely suicide, right?
Well, I'm not sure how sure I am about anything
Okay.
these days.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
but let me say this, that right from day one, the police themselves always suspected of suicide. They never, in the police file, there isn't any idea of a homicide in there. It was never classed as a homicide. So they saw it as a suicide. Whether in fact it's some suicide or some accidental death, or he was just ill and died of unknown causes, I don't know. I'm not a medical pathologist, so it's beyond my pay grade. One of the sad things about this case is that the original medical pathology report has been lost throughout time, so we don't have those original documents. All we have is is a transcript of the notes of the pathologist talking in court, in the coroner's court in 1949. And because he's talking before a court, it's summarized without all the scientific detail.
Oh, okay.
And he's using more lay terms. So when I show this transcript of the inquest to a modern pathologist, they just shrug their shoulders and say, well, I can't tell you what that really means because this is imprecise language.
Yeah.
So, unless by some miracle we dig into an archive one day and miraculously find the original technical pathology report, I don't think we will find out much about how this guy really died.
Okay. I just I've covered this story. I've covered the Isdal woman and a few others, the Peter Bergman case and all that. And it's just funny how the theories around it immediately go to spy stuff and really intricate stories. The things just kind of get blown bigger and bigger for these kinds of stories, and it's always funny to me because it usually just winds up being something kind of mundane.
Yeah, I think probably in all these three cases they were just loners.
Yeah.
And that's how it is.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about this one, well, and all of them really, is that it's not that there's not any evidence, there's almost too much evidence. Like there's so many different things that tie into this and it could be that, and it just kind of gives you all these different directions to go in. Has that code in the book been deciphered? Was it just a something about gambling, like he did horses and stuff, or
Well, my students and I looked at this over and over again.
that was kind of
Over and
what got you into it, isn't it?
As we looked at it over and over again, a number of years with different sets of students. So we repeated the tests and did new ones. And every time we statistically tested, it just came up every time as the first letters of words in the English language. And we tried all sorts of ideas of ways of testing that. And each time that's how it came up. Also, we went through all the known World War II ways of creating codes
Mm-hmm.
that were known in that era. And basically, we can eliminate virtually most of them
Hmm.
uh, for one reason or another. Just a trivial example, some codes work on the principle of even number of letters and you pair them. So obviously, it can't be that one. That's out already because it's an odd number
Yeah.
and things like that. So there are lots of ways you can eliminate various codes. Some codes rely on evenly distributing the letters that you end up with. And so it can't be any of those because those letters do not have an even distribution. They're very spiked.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, we were able to eliminate a ton, and it just really, when you just really look at it, it doesn't have the sophistication or the structure of a real cryptographic code.
Mm.
It's really just first letters of letters,
So,
first letters of words.
so whoever it was that wrote that code, whether it was him or some previous owner of the book or whatever, it was just writing. It was just making. Maybe it was a grocery list of like M for mayo and B for
Yeah,
banana or something.
yeah. And you said you did a cup podcast on the Isdal woman, and
Mm.
there that was actually cracked. She actually did have some letters, and it turned out to be the first letters of cities that she had traveled to.
Right. Yeah.
So, this could be something similar. It could be not that, but it might be, first letters of horse names he was betting on or,
Mm.
anything.
Yeah.
Who
Yeah. Well,
knows?
I'd heard the horse betting thing. Um,
And and whether he actually really wrote that or not, we don't know. That's a big assumption, isn't it?
yeah. Yeah. Well, I was wondering that about the whole Joe Thompson thing, about her name being in the book. Like maybe it was something that she gave to somebody else before and they sold it
Oh,
to a used bookstore or something.
oh, a small correction there. Her name was not in the book. It was her phone number.
Oh, okay. Just the phone number.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the police tracked her down through that phone number.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, so either she knew him and he had her phone number, or it was just some coincidental thing.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps, people put their phone numbers in classified advertisements in newspapers and things in those days. Maybe he
Hmm.
saw something in there and wrote down her number, thought, oh, I got to ring up and get so and so. Who knows?
Yeah.
But kind of that sounds a little unlikely if you're about to commit suicide or something. Why would you want to go and buy whatever she's advertising? But
Yeah.
uh, who knows? Maybe there is some connection between them, but whether we'll find out what that real connection is, I don't know. Maybe we will one day.
Mm-hmm. Is that something you're still pursuing, or are there any other parts of the case that you're still involved in?
Yeah, I mean, we would like to find out if there's some connection between the two people. And I think the only way we're going to find that out is by looking into the life of Charles Webb.
Yeah.
That's his name, and and find out who his connections are, and just see if these two people connect in some way. There could be good reason to. For instance, they were both um, strangers to our state. Um, Charles Webb lived in a state called Victoria and was
Mm.
visiting here in Adelaide. And same with Joe Thompson, that he had, whose number he had. She had only been living here about a year. She was from Victoria too.
Mm.
So perhaps they knew each other from the past. Who knows?
Hmm. That's challenging.
Interesting. They came from both from the same state,
Yeah.
but Could be just a coincidence.
Yeah. Huh. It's funny because I'm trying to not sensationalize it, but your brain just kind of wants to make it like, ooh, they had a thing going on or something, you know?
Yeah, it's tempting to say that, but when there's no strong evidence, I think you have to just look at it dispassionately.
Yeah. Well, I gotta say, when this was only a couple of weeks ago or so, it feels like anyway. When those pictures were found, and ABC did the report on it. Um, like I said, I'm still kind of new to this program. I'm gonna try to share my screen, but I don't know if you'll be able to see it. Let me know if you can see this.
Okay.
Can you see that? No,
No,
nothing.
I just see you.
You just see me? Oh, okay. Well, I've got up on screen basically that the rendering of was it Vox Art? Is that what the name is? Vosh Art. That's what
Oh,
it says
Daniel
here.
Voshart. Daniel Voshart.
Voshart. Oh, okay. But yeah, that
Yeah,
rendering with the tie and
yeah,
everything.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
So he just a little bit of backstory on
yeah.
that. He is the guy that does the CGI graphics for all the Star Trek movies.
Oh, okay. I saw that. Okay, I saw something in a headline about that, but I didn't know if that was
He's,
the same
he's
guy.
the man. He's the man. So he's got all the latest software to
That's
do
really cool.
to do images, and he's got AI software and the whole works.
Uh,
So he actually used AI to reconstruct the Somerton Man's face from
okay.
the autopsy photo to try and make him look as he would if he was alive.
Hmm.
What inspired me to actually ask him to do that, why I felt we needed something like that, is because this was in the days before we knew his identity.
Hmm.
And it struck me, and anyone can do this. You can just go out and do Google, and Google Marilyn Monroe's autopsy photo, and it's online, and have a
Yeah.
look.
Yeah.
You will see it actually looks nothing like
Right.
Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah.
If you saw somebody lying on the street looking like that dead, you would not guess that was Marilyn.
Right. Yeah.
So it made me think maybe we've been looking too long at this uh, photo of this dead guy, and that's actually not what he really looks like.
Yeah.
And so that's what motivated me to reach out to Daniel. And I thought he did a great job of reconstructing that using AI. What was your question about the photo, by the way?
Well, just real quick, did you have a relationship with him before? You just reached out cold and said you
Oh,
wanted
I
to see what he
just
could do,
we just cold contacted him. Yeah,
and he did
I
it.
think
That's cool.
I think Colleen, who I worked with on this case, I think she was the one who first reached out and cold
Oh, okay.
contacted him, and there, yeah, we just hit it off from there.
That's cool.
He did a fantastic job.
Well, so yeah, what I was bringing up, and I'll put it on the screen for our viewers. Unfortunately, I guess you can't see it, but um, I have it up next to that picture of, is it Carl or Charles?
Well, he was born Carl Webb, but he never liked the name. He
Okay.
always went by the name Charles Webb.
Okay.
So I call him Charles Webb
Okay.
because that
Well,
was his common name.
I was making jokes in the video about how all Australians have multiple names apparently, because every single person in the story had like a separate name that they went by.
Well, I mean, you guys say Marilyn Monroe. You don't say Norma Jean, even though that's her real
Well,
name. It's like I prefer to use the name that he actually used in everyday life, which is Charles Webb.
okay. Well, so what I've got up on the screen is that rendering that we were just talking about next to one of the photos that was found of Charles when he was alive. And the first thing that I thought when I saw it was like, wow, that is really close.
Yeah,
Like that is really close. I mean, he looks a little bit older in the rendering, but he was much younger in that photo than
yeah.
you
To be
know.
precise, he's about 20 years younger in
Yeah,
the real photo. Yeah,
yeah.
and
But that's remarkable. Like it looks so close.
yeah, yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted to like put that up for people to see because that just
And
blew my mind.
I'm hoping in the future we'll find more real photos of him. That photo, while it's good, is kind of disappointing in some ways because it's so low resolution. It
Yeah.
would be nice. It would be nice to find a better photo of him in much higher resolution.
And the
You can
light's kind of severe on his face, so you can't really see the details in his eyes and
you
stuff
can
like that.
really, because this, in the Somerton Man autopsy photo, you can see he's got a very small mole above his lip. It would be nice to have the kind of resolution where you could actually see that on the real picture.
So you like mysteries, do you? I'm a bit of a mystery guy myself, which is why I made a series on the mysteries of the human body, which you can watch on Nebula. Nebula is a streaming service created by educational YouTubers like myself who wanted to find a place to exist outside the confines of the YouTube algorithm, where we can experiment with newer and bigger projects and you can follow the people that you like algorithm free. Now, if you're listening to this podcast right now, like right after it came out, there is a video version of it available right now on Nebula, which you can see exclusively before it gets released on YouTube. And if you're watching it on Nebula, well, you wouldn't be hearing this because all my videos in Nebula are ad-free. Nebula is only $5 a month, and you get access to hundreds of educational creators. It's a little less than that with the annual plan, but the best way to get it is to sign up for the Curiosity Stream bundle. Curiosity Stream, of course, is one of the best documentary streaming services in the world, if not the best, as far as I'm concerned, with thousands of titles from award-winning filmmakers from all around the world. Like, if you like solving crimes and mysteries, you might like the series Crime Scene Solvers, in which each episode takes you on a real true crime case and invites you to help figure it out. So, if you sign up for this bundle at curiositystream.com/JoeScottPod, you'll get both Nebula and Curiosity Stream for the absurdly low price of $14.79 for the entire year. Two great streaming services, ad-free YouTube content, and documentaries on documentaries on documentaries for a little over $1 a month. You might never leave your TV again. So, if you get all that and you like it and you want to do it, it does support this podcast. So one more time, it's curiositystream.com/JoeScottPod. One more time, curiositystream.com/JoeScottPod. Go check it out.
And there are people out there who don't believe that's his photo,
Mm.
but and there are a number of there are a number of things about the photo that are interesting. Like his hair looks quite blonde in that photo.
Yeah.
What you have to realize is that A, it's a black and white photo. B, you don't know the angle and what the sunlight is doing on the shine of his hair.
True.
So and things like that. And perhaps some people's hair bleaches in the sun if you've been out in the sun a lot, and then it goes darker later. So we don't really know. I don't think there's a lot you can hang off the tone of his hair. Another interesting thing, this is something I observed myself when I immediately saw the photo, and various other conspiracy theorists are now pointing this out. But I never said anything about it at the beginning because I dismissed it myself. But if you look at the photo, there's a photo of 4 people there where he's standing with his parents and his brother.
Mm.
Now, his brother was a prisoner of war, and so has a military record. So you can look up his exact height in his military record.
Okay.
And that's the first thing I did, just to check. And the brother is actually shorter than Charles Webb. But in the photo, they look roughly the same height.
Mm.
And their height difference is not that much. I think it's less than 2 inches. I can't remember the exact amount, but somewhere between 1 and 2 inches. But you have to realize this photo is taken on a field. It's out in the open on grassland,
Mm.
and you're not on flat land, so you don't know if somebody's actually standing on a little bit of higher ground than the other.
Yeah.
And another thing is sibling rivalry. If ever there's a photo of me next to my brother, I'm always standing on my tiptoes just to be as tall as him. You know what I mean?
As the shortest guy in my family when I was growing up, I know what that's about. Yeah.
Yeah. So us guys played these tricks. So you don't know what's going on in that photo.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a lot you can say from the height because it's not a full height photo.
Mm.
So yeah. So there's a couple of little rabbit holes there, right there for you.
Well, in terms of the the genetic stuff. You mentioned Colleen a second ago. She's popped up in a few different things that I've worked on, videos and stories and stuff. She's kind of a rock star. What was it like
She's
working with her? I mean,
Oh, it was great. It was good fun working with Colleen.
yeah.
We worked well together. Um, I think uh, and there was things when we're working through. You probably heard the story that we built out the family tree together,
Hmm.
and we
No,
had
but feel
like
free to
four.
talk about that. Go into detail if you want to.
We had 4,000 people on there, so it was a huge job,
Yeah.
and we probably split that workload fairly equally. She was really good at actually starting it off and getting it going, and I think I came to the fore at actually being at finishing and actually tunneling down
Mm.
and finding alive relatives from that tree. Um, so so it was a good complementary activity. And there were times when we're building that tree where I was skeptical about something and she wasn't, and vice versa, where she was skeptical and I wasn't, and it was good to have two different people looking at it with two pairs of eyes, because we were able to correct each other's mistakes as we went along. So yeah, you want to do have a little bit of a story about the process we went through. So when we got the DNA and we uploaded it, we found that the closest match was somebody that lived in Australia. So it was starting to look like, and the other next closest matches were all in Australia too.
Mm.
So it's starting to look like, hey, this guy is from Australia. Like, why would you get these close matches here? Because there was quite a big hypothesis that the Somerton Man could have been American, because he carried lots of American
Yeah.
items of clothing and things like that, and an American aluminum comb, which we didn't sell here in Australia at the time. Um, but I'll get back to that, why it is that he had so much American stuff, if you're interested.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, we'll come. We think we have a solution to that.
Okay.
But anyway, that hypothesis was obviously wrong now, because there were so many Australian connections. And his first connection worked out to be something like, I'm doing this from memory now, so I might get this off by one
Mm.
or two places, but it was like a first cousin three times removed. I don't think it was two times, I think it was three times. Uh, so that was the best connection we had to work with. Um, Unfortunately, that connection had an unknown father.
Mm.
And so we thought, this is maybe a little bit too hard, working with this unknown like this. Let's go and look at the next connections down the list. So we went on our merry way, building out all these connections and their family tree. So this is why it came to 4,000,
Yeah. Yeah.
because we're doing it from all these. And, those other ones kind of led nowhere. So Colleen said, okay, well, let's go back to our first guy. Let's see if we can find out who his real father is,
It's
because
like to
that's,
solve this mystery, you got to solve that mystery, and then to solve that one,
yeah,
you got to solve this one. And
we got to solve that. So that actually turned out not as hard as we had thought. We probably shouldn't have dismissed it on day one. We should have tried that straight away, but we didn't know how hard it was going to be. So uh, Colleen gets the kudos for that. She cracked that, and so we built out the tree from this guy, now that we knew who his father was. And there was a huge branch of the family that connected to a family by the name Keane,
mm. Hmm.
Kean. And
Did
Colleen,
that just make your heart like pump
yeah,
when you saw that? It had to have
well,
been.
no, it made Colleen's heart pump, not mine. I was skeptical.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Colleen said, "This is it. It's got to be one of these Keens."
Uh,
She was super excited about the Keen thing.
Yeah.
And I'm going, oh,
Well,
I
for
don't know,
anybody who's
Colleen.
listening and doesn't get it, his tie and some of his clothing had T Keen in the written on there.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, by the way, it's not T keen. It's a strange letter keen. It
Oh,
could be anything else. People always say in the media it's a T because that's the nearest thing that comes to their mind. But it's just some like weird
oh,
stroke that could be a
okay,
T. But I pointed out many years ago that this could be a T, an I, or a J. It doesn't have to be a T.
okay,
Because what's happened is somebody has written this cursively and then said to themselves, "Oh, this is too hard writing on this woolen tie cursively with an India ink pen. I'm going to now do the rest in block capitals." And that cursive way of starting a letter could be an I,
sure,
a J, or a T.
okay,
Um, but I'll come back to that. It turns out that it's not an I or a T; it's a J. But I'll get back to that
okay.
later in the story.
Well, to
So
anybody
anyway,
who was listening and was confused, the word Keen was written
yeah,
on the clothes.
yeah. Uh, so it was written on the tie. I think it was written on a couple of. In Australia, we say vests. What's the white thing you wear under your shirt? Uh,
Oh, like a tank top,
yeah,
like
you
an
say tank
undershirt.
top. Yeah, you say undershirt. Okay, we say
Well,
vest for that.
we actually call them here.
What?
We call them wife beaters.
Oh, okay.
Somehow that
Well,
just became an okay thing to call it, and that's what people
right.
just call it here. And I'm always just like, how are we okay with this? Anyway, sorry, but yeah, a little undershirt. Yeah.
A little undershirt. Yeah. So he had this name on a couple of undershirts, spelled Keane. And for those who are into real detail, into really fine details, in one of the undershirts, the last E was missing.
Uh,
But there is a kind of an annotation in the coronial or inquest or police notes somewhere I saw, which said, but it looks like the E was really there. It had just faded in the laundering.
mm,
So it was Keane on the tie and shirts. And get this, there was a canvas laundry bag. It wasn't handwritten on that bag, it was stenciled.
mm,
So when you stencil on a laundry bag in those days, that screams to me of some institution like the military.
right.
You're some kind of GI, and this was your military laundry bag.
Right.
Um, and you can Google military laundry bags, and you can see they're just like that. You can
Yeah.
see it in Google Images. Uh, so yeah, so when the cops first saw this name Keane, they thought, back in the 40s, they thought this has got to be the guy, but they could find no one with that name in Australia that had gone missing.
Mm,
So it was like a real dead end. But then when Colleen saw the family name Keane was connected to one of our DNA matches, she got real excited. She said, "This has got to be it." But we went through all the Keanes super carefully, and we could find none that were unaccounted for. They all had dates of death. They were all there, all the ones
mm,
that were in the right date range to be the right age for the Somerton Man. And she said, it's got to be one of these. We must be just missing one. And I said, well, don't you think it's a bit of a coincidence? Colleen Keane's a pretty common name. It's,
I was going to ask if that's a common name in Australia or not.
it's common in America too. Expand anybody's family tree, there's probably a Keane in there somewhere, especially when you expanded it out to 4,000 people. Uh, so, I'm saying, uh, and, and she said, we've got to investigate this further. And it turned out they were Catholics, right? So we got to go to the Catholic church where they were all baptized
Hmm.
and pull out their baptismal records. And so I said, "Oh, do I really have to do that, Colleen?" Yes. So okay. Uh,
Are you serious about this or not?
okay, okay. So you're serious. Okay, so we did that. I made a nuisance of myself in that particular church. It's called St. Elipius Church in a place called Ballarat in in Victoria. So anyone from that church who's listening, sorry I made such a nuisance, and
It was all worth it.
that your baptismal records actually weren't worth it.
Oh no, okay.
It came to nothing.
Another
Uh,
dead end.
we did not find any missing keens in those baptismal records. They were all accounted for. So, so then Colleen said, that's interesting that one of the guys called Charles Webb is married to one of these keens and doesn't have a date of death. And I said, yeah, but that's nothing. That could be the case. This could be Charles Webb. Great. However, that's nothing to do with the guy's tie, right? That's just a coincidence that he's, married to one of them.
Mm.
And and she goes, okay, well, we're going to look at this Charles Webb guy next. Actually, we'd actually there's another part of the story. We actually looked at another guy first that didn't have a date of death before Charles Webb. I'm trying to remember his name now. It's escaped me because it's unimportant now. I haven't
Yeah.
remembered it. It was Frederick somebody. But anyway, we looked into him quite deeply. Still to this day, we can't find his date of death. We don't know what happened to him. But we found a photo of him. And Colleen was saying, this photo, it looks like him. This got to be him. And I'm saying, no, the photo doesn't look like him to me. And you're talking to me now, who has spent the last 15 years having conspiracy theorists send me photos of
Oh,
potential Somerton Man.
I
I've seen
bet.
hundreds of these,
Sure.
and so I've got a really good eye for eliminating them.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I saw this guy, I remember his name now, Frederick Davis. I said, no, this is not him. This doesn't look like him at all. So anyway, we moved on and went to Charles Webb, and so and I wasn't holding my breath because I thought, well, this could just be another Frederick Davis. It'll just be another dead end. Who knows? So we're building out his tree, and there's a real twist here. Um, and Colleen says, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to find descendants of his mother. So it's just from his mother's side only. So if one of those matches, we can then triangulate because we've got a match coming from the other end of the tree, and so if
Mm-hmm.
it triangulates, that's it. I said, great idea. So I set about uh, so so no, we both worked on that. We both tunneled down the mother's tree and built it out, and then my, the task was left to me to actually then tunnel it down further to actually find some alive people and contact them.
Mm-hmm.
So I contact this very nice lady. She was very helpful and cooperative, and I think already had her DNA done on one of the systems. So it was just a matter of her getting her to upload it on our system, and guess what? It was a flop. No match.
Okay, so make sure I'm straight here. Are you still talking about the Frederick guy, or are you talking about Charles at this point?
No, I'm talking about Charles now.
Okay, okay.
Charles was not a match. So
Interesting.
Colleen's still obsessed. So even though she was wrong about the Keane thing, there was actually, spoiler alert, there actually is some kind of connection with Keane. But she was obsessed with this connection with Keane. So because she was so obsessed with Keane, she was thinking, if it's not a Keane, it has to be somebody connected to this Keane. So it's got to be this Charles Webb. So she's obsessed with this Charles Webb now. And so I'm ready to totally dismiss Charles Webb now and move on to
Mm-hmm.
try and find someone else. And she said, there's something wrong here. And she's looking and looking. and she found out, and this is quite subtle. Charles Webb's mother, was on her birth certificate. Her surname is actually Grace. So we assumed that was right. And so we'd built out this whole family tree based on her surname, Grace. But there was enough information floating around on genealogical websites. Some other people in this family had already done some research on this and were suggesting that Mr. Grace, her father, was put on. Mr. Grace was put on her birth certificate as her father, but that wasn't really her father, and it was really a guy by the name of Morris. and and Colleen says, "Okay, we're going to build out the tree based on this Morris surname now, based on this Morris guy." And she said, "Okay, we're deleting all this part of the tree that's Grace." So she went delete, delete, delete. We had to start all over again and build it all out from this Morris guy. And I'm here. I'm thinking, oh God, this is a wild goose chase. This is
Sounds like a
not
lot of
gonna,
wild goose chases.
it's a wild goose chase going for this Morris guy. It's just some people's speculation on there. I'm not sure there's real proof that it's Morris. I wasn't convinced, to be honest. But I thought, yeah, we got to play with this. It's all we've got. So I'm being skeptical here. And so we build out this Morris tree, and to a certain point, and then I tunnel it down, find an alive person in Australia, and contact him. And his name was Antero Bonifacio. And I wasn't holding my breath. I said to Antero, do you mind if getting your DNA tested, because we want to see if you're connected or not to this case. And oh, by the way, when I talk to people, all these potential descendants, I never tell them what case I'm working on. I just say it's a case.
I was going to ask, like, how do people respond when you come to them with this kind of request?
It's part of the protocol, so we don't say what case we're working on.
Okay.
It's just how you do it. So he agreed. He was very very obliging. And it just so happened that his mother was really big on his mother had recently passed away and was really big on family trees and was really into it. And so he kind of was a little bit excited.
Oh, okay.
So because of that. So he was actually keen to get it done. So that was great. So, and when you send your DNA off to one of these, 23andMe or Ancestry.com, these guys can take, like 2 or 3 months. And especially with the post back to Australia, from Australia to America, and with COVID on, and the post is super slow. It's like it's like over 3 months. And so, Colleen and I are, they were waiting basically for 3 months for this to come through. And so we're on tenterhooks, not knowing where to go with this thing, thinking, maybe we should start looking somewhere else. And bang, when it came through, it was a hit. Antero connected.
Okay.
And so it was at this point we decided to make the announcement and announce that we had cracked it. But since then, we have found various other cousins on both sides of the family that connect to the Somerton Man, and ones that are even closer matches than Antero. The best match we've got is somebody who turns out to be a granddaughter of one of Charles Webb's sisters called Doris.
Okay.
And she is like seems to be the closest living relative at the moment. Okay. And she has a huge DNA overlap with the Somerton Man's DNA. So once I got that, I was thinking, right, that's it. This is now time to feed this information to the cops now, and
Yeah.
so they can put it in their report to the
uh,
coroner. So, um, so yeah, that's the story of building out the tree, and how there was all these little twists and turns. Uh, Me thinking that we're miles away from getting it, but we were just around the corner,
uh,
and and it needed both Colleen's enthusiasm and my skepticism tension together to kind
uh,
of pull it all together.
that's amazing. Um,
Yeah,
Especially considering you had your own, I'm going to say hypothesis instead of theory, because every time I say theory in a casual sense, I always get punched in the comments for it. But,
let's
you
say
know, yeah, well, exactly. But no, you had your own hypothesis, and it involved, the Robin Thompson and well, Rachel, and that's how you met her and everything.
yeah,
And I'm just gonna put it out there. Like, I really respect that you had your idea of what you thought it was, but when the evidence said otherwise, you went with the evidence. You didn't try to fit it to your narrative, even though
yeah.
you had
That
more reason than anybody in the world to go that
and,
way.
and there
You know,
was a reason for that. There's a reason for that, and the reason is because it was a hypothesis.
right?
It wasn't. It wasn't actually a hope or an emotional attachment.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a scientific hypothesis. And I had, and I formed that hypothesis because it's the best I had to go on with the information of the time.
At the time, yeah.
And there were a lot of circumstantial factors that fit. And it's quite amazing that so many factors fit, and yet it was all able to be turned over.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it happens in science, in other fields of science all the time.
Yeah.
We have, for hundreds of years, you know, just felt so right that space is Euclidean, and now it turns out, and that's
Yeah.
all completely turned over. So turning over that hypothesis was like turning over Euclid. It was just like that for me.
It's just the way it is. Well, as
It's-
a I'm not okay. I'm a science communicator, but I really am. I think I'm more of a storyteller. That's just kind of my natural talent or whatever. And it's such a good story, and I think that's why maybe it resonated with people so much. Because there was all this like, oh, it's oh, we found this piece of evidence and it says this, but oh no, it's not that because of this over here. But then we find this over here, and it's kind of like it's just this roller coaster that just
yeah.
never seems to quite resolve. And
So, so now let me loop back
uh,
and get back to that point I was making earlier, how this now all connects back to the Keen name
yeah, go for it.
and how he had the tie called Keen.
Hmm.
So, so what happened is Colleen said, okay, so one of the Somerton Man's sisters, his name is Frida Keen, because she married a Keen. And see, her husband, his name is Thomas. Begins with a T, just like the tie. But I said to Colleen, oh, I don't think so. I think it's still just a coincidence because, that tie, to me, that's not a T. That could be a T, an I, or a J. And then when you look up this Thomas King guy about his life, etc., he never went by the name Thomas Keane. He was always called Gerald Keane. It's going back to your joke that Aussies always have different
Right.
first.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was no exception for Gerald. And
Interesting.
I'm saying, Colleen, no, this is Gerald. He would never put a T on his tie. Come on. No. This has to be Thomas. That's his tie. And I said, but no, something's wrong here. But anyway, I'm poking around, and
Uh,
I find that uh, Gerald Keane has a son called John Keane
okay.
with a J. And I'm thinking, J is one of my options that this
Hmm.
strange letter could be. And it turns out he has a war record. So I was able to look him up, find his photo, find out details about him. And guess what? His signature is in cursive in his war record when he's signing up, and the way he did his J for his John Keane was very kind of sloppy and going straight down without a little curve at the bottom of his
Hmm.
J, which is just like how it is on the tie.
Wow.
So I'm thinking, I got this guy. This is the son. But then you got to figure out, well, how come Charles Webb's got his clothes and how come so many of these things are American? So
Hmm.
I'm looking at this guy's war record. And so he was
This is John
died,
Keane.
John Keane,
Yeah. Okay.
but this is the Somerton Man's nephew. So I'm looking at his war record. He dies in 1943 in the war,
Oh.
and all his clothes and possessions are sent back to his parents, as you do
Uh-huh.
for any parent whose son has died in the war. You send everything back. And in the war record, there's a big long list, a checklist of items of stuff they sent back, 2 pairs of underpants, 5 socks, all that
Uh-huh.
sort of thing. Going through in laborious detail. I'm going down the list, and it says things like map of Chicago, American coins, da da da. So this guy's been to America.
Interesting.
uh, so all this stuff's been sent back, and to his parents. And, as a parent, what do you do with all this stuff? You might mourn for a month or two with the stuff and think, okay, well, let's give it away.
Mm.
And perhaps these Charles Webb might have been close to his nephew or something and decided to take that stuff off their hands. And that's how I believe he ended up with this tie
Hmm.
that had a possibly JT or I Keen on it, and
Mm.
we're now thinking it's J Keen, and how there's some American items in there. It kind of starting to all make sense.
Wow. Wow.
Isn't that weird?
Well, and it's one of these things. It's like that decision made in 45 or something for him to take these items for whatever reason, and here we are now 70 years later still kind of piecing it all together. It was just a common thing that happened,
Yeah.
probably very mundane, but now it's like this big wow moment in a 70-year-old mystery. It's just interesting.
So the other thing so just moving on now, the other things we're able to find out about him is that his dad was a baker.
Okay.
He was a German immigrant who emigrated to Australia and went into the bakery business. He had several different bakeries, moved around a bit, but settled down eventually in a place called Springvale in Victoria and opened up a big bakery there with his wife. And we found out through records that basically Charles and his brother Roy, the one, this is a brother that also died in the war, um, basically worked at that bakery.
Hmm.
So they're working in that bakery, and uh, from being in their late teens to later, and seems that Roy was the one that did the bread deliveries, and possibly Charles was doing helping in the baking. But it seems also, simultaneously at the same time, Charles went to college. So it's a place now still exists. It's called Swinburne University in Victoria, but in those days it was called Swinburne Technical College.
Hmm.
And it seems he did electrical uh, engineering there. And he was doing this at the same time as being in the bakery. As far as we can tell, that was just his qualifications. He didn't seem to. Maybe he was moonlighting and doing bakery and doing some electrical engineering at the same time. We don't know for sure yet, but we do know for sure that the bakery was sold in 1939 because his dad died at that time, and that's when Charles decided to finally get married.
Mm.
So he got married quite late for a man in those days, about 10 years later than most guys did.
Maybe that
Uh,
late 20s, early 30s.
so let's see. He got married in 41 and he was born in 1905. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, late 30s.
Yeah.
Quite late in those days. Common now, but
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
uh, like all his siblings were married much earlier than he was.
Uh-huh.
So he was like mummy and daddy's boy, being the last to stay on at the bakery.
uh,
Do you know what I mean? Whereas
yeah.
all the others gone off and got married. He was mummy and daddy's boy, and yeah, and so it's then when he got married, he seemed we can now trace that he actually worked for a place called the Red Point Tool Company, and they made electric drills, hand drills.
Okay.
So he was maybe have been designing and fitting the electric parts of those drills. One assumes. Uh, and then it appears that in 1947 he falls off the radar because that's when he separates with his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the last we have any record of him at all.
Yeah.
And then suddenly in 1948 he appears on the beach in Adelaide. So that's
I
the story.
I had read some stuff about, I guess, what his wife had said about him in the divorce, and it sounds like he was a troubled guy.
Yeah, and you know you can kind of people go to war, they come back and have PTSD and
Yeah.
that sort of thing, post traumatic stress disorder. And even though he didn't actually go to war, you can possibly see that he may have suffered that himself
Mm-hmm.
because you know his elder brother was not obviously not well because his elder brother actually he had another brother other than Roy called Richard uh, Richard Russell who um, who actually died just the year after him.
Mm.
So he was already not well. In fact, all his siblings actually died quite young of heart issues,
Oh
blocked
wow.
arteries. Yeah, because in those days they're all smokers and stuff,
True. Yeah.
and they all died. Um, in their 50s. I think there was only one that lasted to their early 60s. They were all gone in, most of them gone in their 50s.
Hmm.
So his elder brother died just after him. So his elder brother was not well. His elder brother's wife had died of a heart problem quite young. Um, then his father died in 39. Then his mum died in the early 40s. His nephew, John Keane, died at war. His
Mm-hmm.
own brother Roy died at war as a prisoner of war in a prison camp. Was killed in the camp.
Wow.
Um, then his marriage breaks down with his wife. That's a whole bunch of
Mm-hmm.
stuff going on right there. And if he was a bit of a sensitive guy,
Mm-hmm.
if it was me, I'm kind of like tough as nails, and uh, you know, yeah,
Well, and they
I'd
probably
react.
didn't have access to mental health services back then the way we do
Yeah,
today.
yeah. But for some people, um, that could be quite stressful.
Yeah.
That could be quite stressful.
Well, and what you're just talking about with World War II, it's honestly it's not something I'd really even thought about till just now. But with this pandemic that we're still kind of coming out of, we're all kind of feeling the effects of that, and we kind of
Yeah,
are recovering from that. And like, just imagine what
yeah,
World War II must have been like.
yeah. That's exactly right. Because think about this: COVID, right, was not even a war, and yet there are so many mental health
Mm-hmm.
problems because of our whole lifestyles changing and not getting out as much and working from home and
Yeah.
when we- for, when we didn't want to and things like that. There's a whole bunch of mental health problems that come out of that. So just imagine the stress of a World War II and knowing that your relatives are dying out there.
Mm-hmm.
um, and the whole world is at war. That's very stressful stuff going on there.
Yeah,
Um,
it kind of puts it all in perspective.
yeah. So, and in those days, when you write divorce papers, you obviously are encouraged by the lawyers of the day to be as
Mm.
mean as possible.
Probably
uh,
especially for the woman's side.
yeah, to,
Yeah,
to, to pull out everything you've got so that it gets approved.
yeah.
And that's what basically happened in those days. But the funny thing is that his wife Dorothy then gets married again to another guy in 1952. It's the same year that her decree nisi from Charles Webb comes through, and she marries this guy called Jeff Lockyer. And then Jeff and her get divorced in the mid 50s, and in their divorce papers, he's the one that files for divorce this time, and he cites her as being cruel.
Interesting.
So,
Hmm.
who's the cruel one in this relationship? Who knows?
Who knows? Wow.
So, I don't think you can read too much in these old divorce
Hmm.
papers. Um, I think you can. There's some things she says in those divorce papers that you can take on face value, like says that he was into writing poetry. I believe that.
Hmm.
She'd have no reason to make that up. You know, and little nuggets like that are quite interesting because hey, this is a guy with a Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam,
Right.
so that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, if you think of the average macho Aussie guy in the 1940s, they ain't going to be walking around with a Rubaiyat. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
So this kind of starts to all make sense now.
Mm. This episode is also brought to you by Canker Boy. So this might be a little personal, maybe a little uncomfortable to talk about, but some people, and you might be one of them, get canker sores. Not to be confused with cold sores or fever blisters that cluster around your lips and that kind of thing. That's something else. That's herpes simplex. Canker sores are on the inside of your mouth. They're round, they're red, and they make eating an orange feel like you got stabbed in the head with a lightsaber. They're super painful, and they can swell up to the point that you can barely even talk. Most of you probably don't get them regularly, which is good for you. But for those who do, you know what I'm talking about. So this is something that I've personally suffered with for my whole life. It's a family thing. But along the way, I did stumble across a solution that actually helps, and that's Canker Boy. It's a vitamin supplement that you take once a day, and it helps keep down your body's overproduction of inflammatory cytokines, which is the root cause of recurring canker sores. It's been on the market for about 5 years. There's a ton of positive testimonials on Amazon. Everybody's different, so of course your results may vary, but most people do experience a reduction in the number and severity of their ulcers within 2 to 6 weeks. So if you're one of the poor souls like me who deal with these recurring canker sores, can't hurt to give it a try. Just go to cankerboy.com. That's cankerboy.com. There you'll find a link to buy it on Amazon if you want to do that, but we do offer it as a subscription. And if you sign up using the code CONVERSATIONS, you'll get 60% off your first 2-month supply. There's also plenty more information there if you still have questions. So once again, it's cankerboy.com. Go check it out and live life pain-free. Interesting. We're just kind of like putting together this guy's life from all those years past.
Oh, and here's an interesting thing that might spark off some conspiracy theories.
Ooh, yay.
Dorothy's divorce papers show that she's in this state. She had moved.
To Adelaide?
Yeah. So the filing was in 1951, showing that she was in a small town outside of Adelaide, but she may have been in Adelaide proper earlier. We don't know yet. At the time of Charles Webb visiting. So
Oh, okay.
if we can establish what year she actually arrived here, because it's likely she would be in the main part of Adelaide when first arriving.
Uh,
You don't go off to some little town in the middle of nowhere straight away, right? You kind of come to the big city. You maybe meet some guy who then takes you out there, who's Jeff. So yeah, so if she was here, and then now he's here and he visits and he's died, you know, and she's down as working in a pharmacy, and there's all these conspiracy theories that he was poisoned or had an overdose or
Uh,
something. Um, you know, but who knows
yeah.
if we can ever join those threads together? But that's the next conspiracy that
Right.
people are looking at right now.
uh, there's all yeah. You can't
Whether
help
I
but like try to build the case and yeah.
Yeah, so whether something nefarious was going on with her and um, her assisting his death or not, I don't know.
Mhm.
Um, but it's something I think people will play with that idea for some time to come.
Well, I would love to jump back just real quick, and um, I'm. This is something you spent a lot of time on. You've definitely put a lot of work and elbow grease into solving this and everything. Um, and I can see why it's fascinating. Obviously, I've done a couple of videos on it for that reason, but I would just love to hear from you. Like, what was it about this when you first ran across this case that wound up like tying you to it for the next almost 2 decades?
Well,
Because this is not your background at all. You teach electrical
engineering, yeah.
engineering. Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Um, well, there's a lot of connections. There's the coding and doing all the statistics and
Mm-hmm.
analysis of codes. In electrical engineering and computer science and stuff like that, we have to know about computer security and codes and that sort of thing. We teach that stuff. So that ties in. Um, another thing that ties in is all the information management and informatics, and there's also bioinformatics of DNA. Um, these are all things engineers get involved with. Just this year, I got my students to write some cute software uh, that can take all the names off this family tree of 4,000 people and put them as little dots on Google Earth according to where they were
Oh,
born.
uh-huh.
So we've now got software to automate that, where we can suck all this information off a family tree and stick it on Google Earth, and actually visualize where everybody on this tree is over time. And we've got a slider bar to change the year, and we can see how all the clusters of points move around. And so we want to use this software. We want to write this and more software that will assist investigators in the future that are
Oh,
trying to
okay.
work out family trees like this. And finding geographical clustering like this is very helpful when you've got this daunting, huge tree and you don't know where to start looking. Um, uh, so there's lots of skills that we use in this. It all comes together.
Mm-hmm. So the same kind of mental tools that you use as an electrical engineer applied to the gathering of data
Yeah.
on this mystery.
Yeah. And electrical engineering comes up in all sorts of unexpected places. Like if you walk into a hospital these days, you think it's all medical, but everything in there is electronic,
It's true. Yeah.
And, who do you think made that stuff? Us electrical engineers,
Right.
right? So we have to learn about everything. We have to learn about medicine and all
Hmm.
kinds of things to be able to apply our our equipment to different things.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and we have students that we graduate go off and because they're so good at math, they get job offers in places that just work on the stock market and stuff, and they become financial traders because they've
Mm-hmm.
got all the maths and computational skills to do all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it pops up all over the place. It's one thing I say to my students: it's great being an electrical engineer because you'll never be without a job, and I'll tell you why. Because every industry, no matter what the industry is, has got some electrical engineering or electronic engineering in
Mm.
it somewhere. Um,
It's true.
so you can get a job in any industry.
Hmm. But for you personally, it wasn't the story that pulled you in. I guess it was just sort of like the connecting of the dots and the minutia of the details and stuff like that. I'm just trying to get like why you became so. I don't want to use the word obsessed, but you've dedicated a lot of time to this.
Oh, yeah. When it's reported in the media, they like to say I was obsessed. But, I, you know, and how I was saying to you that just even in my normal everyday engineering work, did I say this to you that the toughest paper I've ever published, scientific paper, took me 15
Yeah, yeah,
years,
yeah.
right? So it needs a certain level of obsession to kind of stick through with it and keep going
Mm-hmm.
that long. Maybe I wouldn't say obsession. Maybe I'd say persistence, I
Mm-hmm.
think is the word. Um, in the
Fixation
academic, well, in
is
the
even that
academic,
too strong?
in the academic world, in a university, we have very clever people,
Uh,
right? And the way I look at it is I look at it like athletes, like sportsmen. You see guys with huge muscles like Arnold Schwarzenegger,
uh,
and then you see guys that are thin as a beanpole, but is like the world's fastest marathon runner,
right.
right? And they're two different body types. You can't expect each to do each other's
Mm-hmm.
sport, right? And it's the same in a university with everybody's brains. They're all very clever, but clever in different ways. Some of them have got a Schwarzenegger brain, very good at heavy lifting some difficult problems quickly,
Mm-hmm.
but are terrible at sticking with a long problem for many years. And then
Gotcha.
some dumb guys like me who aren't that clever, but will just stick with it
Uh,
to make it happen. So I see myself as the marathon running of
okay.
solving problems. I'm not. I don't have a big muscular brain. I
Uh,
have a lean, mean one, the
you're the persistence hunter.
one that will just go the distance.
Yeah.
Because I have to overcompensate for not having a
Oh, I
brain,
doubt
right?
that's true.
Um,
I get where you're coming from, though. I actually
yeah.
read a book recently you might find interesting. It was called Range, and it was, I think the subtitle was Why Generalists Succeed in a Specialized World or something like that.
Hmm.
But it was about like how I don't know, like part of it was talking about kids who were brought up like Tiger Woods was he was 2 years old and he was out on the green putting and stuff like that, and he just was like drilled into golf his whole life. But there are other people like I think was Kobe Bryant one of them, or was it Roger Federer? Definitely Roger Federer was like he did all kinds of things when he was young, and then he just eventually like found tennis, and tennis became his thing. But anyway, to stick with your athletic metaphor there, but it was basically making the point that like people who are generalists and kind of like dip their toes into everything can have an advantage in business and life and whatnot. So what you just
Yeah.
said made me think of that a little bit.
Oh, you said you don't mind a few rabbit holes. I've got a really good one for you
Go
here.
for it. Yeah.
Is the process we went through to actually get the DNA out of the hair is a very interesting
Mm,
story. I don't know if you know the full story of that,
probably not.
but what happened was it was around 2012 that I noticed that the Somerton Man's death mask. And for those of the listeners who don't know what a death mask is, it's a plaster bust of a person, but not any old plaster bust. It's one that's actually directly molded off the body, off the dead body.
Yeah.
So in the police museum here in Adelaide, they have his death mask that was made of the man 6 months after he died. And they did it because they were about to bury him and they wanted an effigy of him
Mm.
so that they could show people in case they found a long lost relative or
Yeah.
something like that. Um,
And
and
of course,
it's
that
around,
mask, it was 6 months later. You can tell it's just so like stretched
yeah,
and
it's
yeah,
stretched. His face has flattened
yeah,
because the poor guy's been in a fridge for 6 months,
yeah.
so it is distorted. So I think that plaster bust was a waste of time for what it was intended to do.
Yeah.
Uh, it wasn't a very good image of him, but it was a gold mine for DNA and of course they had no way of knowing that in the 1940s, right?
Yeah, yeah.
DNA was not a thing then, right? So anyway, um, mul- uh, what I found around 2012, I was staring at this plaster bust in the police museum and noticed there were tiny little hairs stuck in the plaster. And you can tell that they were really the guy's hairs because they're standing on end. There's no
Mm,
way you can get accidental hairs standing on end. They're
mm,
going to lie flat. These are actually stuck in the plaster on end. And so this is comes straight out off the body. And so I was thinking way back in 2012, this could be a source of DNA. And so I got permission to extract hairs from the bust. And I took a lady who was an expert in hairs from my university. Her name was Janet Edson. And we went to the police museum together. This is now 3 years later in 2015. And And I'm glad I got her to take the hairs out and not me, because she thought of clever stuff that I would never have thought of. For example, like if you just pull the hair with tweezers, it just snaps.
sure.
And the root is embedded in the plaster, and the root gets left behind.
Mm,
And the conventional wisdom of the time, um, forensic wisdom, was you always need the root when you're doing DNA. Um, Spoiler alert, this whole Somerton Man episode shows that that's actually not true now, but we'll get back to that.
okay.
We'll get back to the point. But this was the wisdom of the time. You've got to have the roots. So we were obsessed with getting roots back in 2015
Yeah.
because this is what everybody was saying we had to
I love how
do.
you're talking about 2015 like it was, a really long
Yeah,
time ago.
yeah. It was a long time ago in the DNA world.
Right, exactly. It just speaks to that.
And as the story unfolds, you'll see how fast the technology
Wow.
is traveling. It's absolutely mind blowing. So 2015 was like prehistoric times for DNA, and so we were saying, oh, we must have the root. So how do you get it out without snapping the hair? It seems impossible, and you can't damage the plaster to get it out because this is an object that's in a museum. This
Yeah.
is now a museum item. You can't damage it in any way.
Yeah.
Um, so she was very clever. She went around with a magnifying glass, looking at all the hairs carefully, and found spots on the scalp where the hairs appeared in a cluster.
Mm,
And what she did is she slid out a hair in the middle of a
got
cluster.
it.
So
Yeah.
it wasn't actually touching the plaster directly,
Wow.
but just touching neighboring hairs. And she was able to slide out a few hairs like this with roots on. So I thought, hey, that's brilliant. That's amazing.
Mm,
And so in our DNA lab at the university in 2015, she she did the work of staining, doing a stain test, and it stained positive for DNA. So that was great. That was that was check one, because because there were various cynics and critics at the time saying, "Oh, you'll never get DNA out of the Somerton Man anyway, because he was embalmed in formaldehyde.
mm.
That's going to kill all your DNA."
Is that true?
But well,
Another rabbit hole? We can.
that was the wisdom of the time. There
Okay.
are now techniques to get around problems with DNA that have been corrupted with formaldehyde. It does make the problem a lot harder, though.
Mm,
So it's nice to not have any formaldehyde messing up the DNA if you can possibly avoid it.
okay.
But this was formaldehyde free.
Yeah.
We showed there was actually no problem with formaldehyde. It was fantastic. So there were obviously parts of the scalp that formaldehyde didn't get to. So that was great. And then, unfortunately, the concentration levels of DNA in the hair root were way too low. And uh, we got no DNA sequence out of it. But we did get one little bit of information. We got that the Somerton Man's maternal haplogroup was H. So people have different DNA groups that they belong to, and the different letters assigned.
Mm.
And group H is very common throughout Europe. So it didn't give us any extra information, but I was excited because it meant there was DNA there.
There was some information that came out of it.
There's
Yeah.
some information. So get this: we go from almost nothing to trying it again in 3 years. And the technology in the lab had just skyrocketed so fast that in 2018, we got the whole mitochondrial genome. And these are guys in our university DNA lab doing this. Not me personally, because I'm just an engineer, but they were doing that.
Sure, sure.
So the whole mitochondrial genome. And what that means is all the DNA from the Somerton Man's mother's side.
Yeah.
But slight catch here, unfortunately, sites like Ancestry.com, 23andMe, etc., they don't use the mitochondrial genome. They use what are called autosomes, which is inherited parts of DNA inherited from mother and father. So it was the wrong part of the DNA. But I was excited because it's like we've gone from almost nothing to this huge amount of DNA data. And the parts that are inherited from the mother and father, this is called the nuclear DNA. The concentration levels were too low for it still. But nevertheless, we got 16,000 markers, 16,000. Now, that might sound like a lot to you, but it's not enough because sites like Ancestry.com, 23andMe, etc., they can use. By the way, it's not just those two companies. I'm just saying their names because they're the big ones. There's actually, do you know, there's like 20 of them now. They're breeding like rabbits.
I know about some health monitoring companies
Yeah.
where you can get a DNA and they can tell you about your predilections for various
There's
things.
basically 20 DNA companies out there now you can go to. And they use anywhere between 500,000 to 2 million DNA markers. And we only got 16,000. That's nothing. And it's like it's so low, the software won't even let you upload it. It's that bad. So we were stuck there. So, but that was such a huge difference over 3 years. So then comes 2022, which is this year, and the beginning of this year, Colleen said, why don't we just send it to a lab in America called Estrella? So this is an American lab, and they're really good at doing hair. And I'm glad we did this in the end because they have some technology that we don't have in our own lab here at our university. And so probably if we waited yet another year, we could have done it in our lab. But, name of the game is to get this out quickly. So I did that. And going by the wisdom of the day, I sent my best hair root that I had been saving up for 10 years. It was in my desk drawer.
And a little Altoids can just hanging out there.
Yeah, just really secure. Huh? But because we had security because no one knew it was there, so no one knew where to look.
Sure. Yeah.
but it was in there, and it was all sealed up in plastic bags, etc. So it was uncontaminated.
Sure.
So I sent this prized hair root that I'd been saving up for 10 years, thinking, okay, this is going to crack it now. And guess what? Estrella had a crack at it, and it was a flop.
Oh.
Yeah, didn't work.
Huh.
So, more out of desperation than actual knowledge, I sent some 5 centimeters of hair shaft with no root because it's like I'm desperate now.
Sure. Yeah.
And bang, they got 2 million DNA markers. 2 million. Isn't that
So
amazing?
so in 2015, the whole I got to get the root thing, and you're saying that this year it turns out that without the root, they were able
Yeah,
to get like way more than they were able to get with the root 3 years before.
exactly. So let me explain the science behind what's going on, what I think is going on here. So what's going on is this wisdom that you had to get the hair root comes from the world of police forensics. And in the
Mm.
world of police forensics, you're only dealing with around about 20 DNA markers, not 2 million.
Oh wow,
And
okay.
there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. You see, a cop DNA test where you're trying to see if a criminal, specific criminal, matches to specific DNA in a crime scene is a one-to-one match. So you can get away with just 20 or so markers. I think in Australia we use 23. I'm not sure if you use 20 or
Uh,
21 in America, but somewhere around there. Okay.
mm.
So uh, now, if you do ancestry.com or something like that, and you want to try and find all your nearest cousins, that's not a one-to-one match anymore. This is a one-to-many match.
Mm.
Different ball game. Different ball game. You can't do that with 20 markers. If you do that with 20 markers, you'll probably connect to millions of people, and you won't be any the wiser of how close they are to you
Yeah.
or not, right? So that's why you need as many as 2 million. That's the science behind it. And the markers the cops use are called STRs, and they're quite long segments of DNA, whereas Ancestry.com uses very short DNA segments called SNPs, SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms. You know, that's what it's short for.
Okay.
And and uh, and lots of them. And it turns out that the reason why cops said always go for the roots is because they're using these STRs, which are much longer and can be found in hair roots in high concentrations. And guess what? You don't get STRs in the hair shaft. In the hair shaft, you only get extremely small segments of DNA that you can use as SNPs that can go up on ancestry.com and stuff like that.
Okay.
And so that's why the hair shaft actually was better in this case um, than hair root because the wisdom came from these long DNA segments,
Mm.
whereas we're only dealing with short ones. And there's plenty of these short ones in the hair shaft.
Hmm.
And here's another factor. Another factor is this hair was over 70 years old. So what's happened is, although you should have got lots of good SNPs in this hair root, normally if it was a fresh one, because it's 70 years old and it's a soft, spongy, porous root, it hasn't protected that DNA very well over that period of time.
Okay.
Um, it's degraded. Whereas the hair shaft, if you take one of your hair, try and pull your hair, it's strong stuff, right?
Sure.
Hair's very strong,
Uh-huh.
and the reason for its strength is it's got made of a protein called keratin,
Mm-hmm.
and that strong protein has left that DNA in much better preservation than the DNA that's in the soft, spongy hair root.
Hmm.
And this is what I believe has happened, and why we got such a good result from shaft and no good from a root. So, so this so this really turns the old forensic wisdom on its head and
Yeah.
is counterintuitive to people who aren't familiar with this new way of doing DNA. Um, and so, I think it has consequences, for other cold cases in the future to
Mm.
understand this difference and understand that you can get good DNA out of a hair shaft.
Yeah.
So that's very exciting stuff. I think a lot of things can be cracked now with this
Yeah.
technique.
Think a lot of these mysteries that I've been talking about are not going to be mysteries for too much longer.
Well,
Actually, they solved that boy in a box thing too recently. I had a
exactly.
lot of people point me toward that.
Yeah. And that's again using this kind of genetic genealogy type approach.
Man, it's just crazy how fast that stuff has progressed, like you were just talking about.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I've kept you far longer than I meant to, but I wanted to. I always want to ask people who are experts in something that I've done a video on. You saw I've done 2 videos now. I guess you've seen them. Um,
Yeah.
Anything I get wrong? Any assumptions I made that weren't right?
Oh, yeah. When I watched your video, I was very, to be honest, I was very impressed with it
Oh, well,
because
thank you.
it was so accurate. Like I've seen other podcasts and they get tons of details wrong. So
Well, I try not to
I was quite,
sensationalize it too much if I can help it. But yeah.
yeah. But even your details were mostly correct. There were like 3 or 4 minor details that were wrong, and were so inconsequential that I don't even remember them now. So there were some things that were not quite right, but they were so minor, I wouldn't
Mm.
worry about it. Yeah.
Nothing that just made you rage watching it.
No,
That's all I'm going for. I'm just trying to just keep people from raging
no,
at
it
my
made me
videos.
rage. It made me think, yeah, I guess if I was a podcaster too, I would have made the same mistake.
Well, there's so many
Uh,
people that have talked about it, and it's a real like I don't have to have like a Google alert or something whenever there's any news on the Somerton Man case. I get 1,000 tweets and emails about it immediately.
yeah,
It's like
yeah.
an early warning system or something. It's a really popular subject, and you worked a
If you
long
really want, I
time.
can watch it again and tell you what those things were, but I can't remember them right now.
Well, probably a lot of the stuff from the first one was proven untrue by now anyway. So that's why I'm
But
getting it from you.
it's all a hypothesis.
Right, it's a hypothesis, not a theory.
Yeah.
I would love to talk for just a minute before we go about the Voynich manuscript thing, though. I mean,
Oh,
I'm fascinated
yeah.
by that.
Before we do, just one thing I'd like to say is talking about hypotheses and things. One thing I like to teach my students is a good scientist. People don't really understand what scientist and being a good scientist is. I say a good scientist is somebody who actually doesn't believe in anything. You,
Mm-hmm.
and but let me unpack that a little. Let me explain what that is. Uh, as a scientist, you're still a human, so you
Mm-hmm.
can have your own personal beliefs and preferences and all that sort of thing. And you do, as any human needs a belief system to kind of make sense of the world around them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's okay. And plenty, you know, many scientists are religious, and it's over sensationalized that they're all atheists or something like that. That's
Yeah,
untrue.
yeah,
That's untrue. They're not. Um, just a few hardcore ones aren't.
very
Uh,
vocal
but
ones.
yeah, we have our private beliefs. But when it comes to science, the science itself, I'm saying, is you don't believe in anything. So what I mean by that is you don't believe in any scientific model. So
Mm-hmm.
what we do in science is we make models of the world. We model how the world operates, and it's important not to actually believe in the model. We're not supposed to believe in the model.
Mm-hmm.
People forget that.
Yeah, yeah,
You just say, okay, so this is a model. It works for the ranges of parameters that we've tested it in the
right.
lab. To then expect this model to magically work outside of the parameter space that it's ever been tested in,
Uh,
that's numerology. That's not science anymore. So that's why you should never believe in any model. You
mm-hmm.
can't believe in it. Um, so yeah, people need to understand that about science,
Yeah.
and and models do get overturned, and new ones come along, uh, and so science is organic. It evolves, and the peer review process of scientific papers is imperfect
Mm-hmm.
because we're just humans too.
Yeah, yeah.
uh, Scientists on a tight schedule trying to peer review somebody's other paper. So the best peer review does is eliminate really obviously wrong papers. It doesn't eliminate every bad thing,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but the scientific process is organic, and what will happen is if there's a paper out there that's got something seriously wrong in there, another paper will come along that will supersede it and turn it over.
Mm.
Um, and so over a process of time, we get better and better, and that's how it evolves. Where the dilemma comes in with science is that if you have to use a science piece of work or reference or paper for some legal problem right now or some
Mm.
medical problem where people's lives are at stake,
Mm.
and you're having to rely on this paper. So that's where the dilemma comes in, and I would say that, if the paper was published yesterday, don't rely on it. You only rely on papers that have been around there for some period of time and have
Mm.
stood the test of time, and other scientists have built upon that work and actually found it useful and been able to do stuff with it. Uh, the real peer review is the time and standing the test of time as
Yeah.
it goes along. And you got to ask the question, has this paper withstood that? Have there ever been any replication studies? Has anyone actually ever reproduced this? Uh,
Sure.
you know,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
uh, is this something that could be in danger of being turned over tomorrow? There's lots of questions before actually using science for some critical everyday thing right now,
Yeah.
and so one has to be a bit careful about that. And I think we're all a bit slapdash with that. It needs to be tightened up.
Yeah. Well, as someone who talks about science and reads all the comments that I get and stuff, it does feel a lot lately, especially with the pandemic and everything, like that the scientific process is A, not really fully understood by most people,
Yeah,
and B, kind of under attack, it feels like a lot of times. And the reason why I definitely want to give you kudos on this whole thing, like I was talking about earlier with kind of you following the evidence and stuff, is I talk about mystery content on the channel for two reasons. One, because people like it, and I like it. I think I'm a decent storyteller. I think that plays into my strengths and stuff. But ultimately, you can learn about science in a lot of different ways, and I think that the way people are learning about science through this story is seeing how the sausage is made, and like seeing people like you, like following a theory and a hypothesis, and that's not right, I'm going to go this way now, and you follow where the evidence leads. And I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here, but I think that you're doing a good service to the world by kind of showing how that works and doing it so publicly. So
thank you. I appreciate you
that's
saying
where I'm
that.
going with that. Yeah.
Thank you.
But yeah, Voynich manuscript. Let's get that out of the way, because
Okay.
yeah. So you were saying earlier you're looking at whether or not it's an actual language, and sometimes I wonder it was just somebody playing a prank or just messing around. I mean,
Yeah.
people invent languages all the time. Conlangs
It
is
might
what they
be,
call them.
it might not even be a prank. It might be a deliberate thing, because in those days, to have a very nice looking manuscript on parchment, you could get a few gold coins for that.
Mm.
So you could sell it to some unsuspecting high bidder
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't know what it says, and so you've got them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just think this is a cute manuscript.
The elfin
And
people. I found this in a cave.
yeah, yeah. So it could just be a scam, a medieval scam.
Yeah.
You know.
I always like. I mean, if I was a billionaire, I would just build a pyramid in the middle of Nebraska, just so that people 1,000 years from now would be like, "What is this? What god were they
Yeah,
worshiping?" or something.
yeah,
I can't imagine that hasn't happened at some point in history.
yeah. I often like to just sit back and wonder, like in say 2000 or 3 years time, when they dig up stuff from today,
Yeah.
and they find, you know, everyday objects like umbrella,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
iPhone, and they go, what is this? What did they do with this stuff?
Well,
Maybe people look at it.
I love history stuff, and it's always funny to me when they find some ancient site or something, and everything they dig up has like religious significance, and it's like maybe it was just a thing they did. There's lots of things that we do that's not necessarily. It's just a tool that we use to get through our day or whatever. I don't know.
That's right.
It's
Yeah,
just funny to
I'm
me.
pretty sure we're right on that one. Yeah,
Most people
I
aren't
have.
worshiping 24 hours a day. They're you know.
Yeah.
Of course, a lot of things that they find are also like burial sites, and of course there are like religious significance around stuff like that. But anyway, um,
Yeah. Yeah, so we can't really say anything definitive about the Voynich one way or another, but I'm not ready to announce my results yet because I'm not totally sure. But I'm leaning towards it being a little bit made up, a little bit
really,
made up.
okay.
Yeah, I'm leaning that way. But I lent various ways of the subject.
You don't trust your leans anymore, do you?
I don't trust my leans anymore. But that's how I'm leaning right now. That might change if some more
Yeah.
evidence comes up. But yeah,
And that
I'm
is
leaning.
not to get too detailed, but is that just based on like kind of the same pattern recognition and looking for trying to read the code kind of thing that you were applying to the Somerton
Yeah,
Man?
yeah. The structure of the way the letters are distributed and things like that are things that we look at computationally, and there's rather a lot of repetition in there. The way things are repeated, and it just doesn't feel right.
Hmm.
It just doesn't feel right. So Um, yeah. Another thing we're doing, which we not ready to say yet, have anything definitive, but we're trying to use computational techniques to distinguish between numbers and letters, um, and we haven't got far enough to say anything
Hmm.
clear about that. But if you can separate different categories of symbols in there to actually be able to say, hey, these symbols are actually just letters only, and these symbols are something else.
Hmm.
They're little special characters or numbers or something. To be able to separate them out would be a big start. The problem is a lot of investigators have just assumed all these symbols, just all letters automatically. It might not be.
Hmm.
There might be other little signs in there.
Yeah.
Uh, um, so yeah, it's a very hard problem. Maybe it'll never be solved. Who knows?
What year do they think it was made? I've
Well,
forgotten.
it's been carbon dated to be sort of like 14th, 15th century, somewhere
Okay.
around there. I don't think you can put an exact date on it,
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
but that's what the carbon dating says.
Okay.
And I think, yeah, when Mr. Voynich himself purchased it, it was in Italy that happened.
Hmm.
So it's obvious. And even when you look at it, you get the feeling this must be European. It's not from some exotic Oriental part of the world or anything like that. Yeah. So,
And they don't really
yeah.
know what its provenance was or whatever before Voynich found it. He just kind of found it there.
Um, yeah. And to be honest, I haven't actually looked into the provenance thing, but yeah, it obviously must stop dead at some point because we don't know who
Yeah.
made it. That's right.
There
But
is a book called the Codex Seraphinius, I think is what it's called. And it was only done in the last 50 years or so, but it kind of makes me think of the Voynich manuscript, but it was literally just a guy doing like an art project. It
yeah,
was it
yeah.
was just for fun, and it's in a made up language, and it doesn't really mean anything. It's got kind of nonsense illustrations and stuff. I've been wanting to get a copy of that book actually because it's just a neat little book. But I don't know. Like I see that, and I'm like, well, people do that kind of thing.
I've actually been to the Beinecke Library in at Yale, where it is,
Oh yeah.
and they let me in.
So you got to
I had a
actually like get a hold of
yeah,
it.
yeah. I was surprised they didn't make me wear cotton gloves or anything like that. I was allowed to touch it with my
Wow,
with my bare skin. Very very odd. But yeah, I happened to know a professor there at Yale, and he managed to get me in, so
that's
that was
cool.
lucky. And it's surprising how small it is. Actually,
Oh,
it's when you see it in the flesh, it's quite a small book made of vellum. but it's quite thick,
Uh,
but quite small. Yeah, very interesting to see it in the flesh. And uh, another little story, talking of getting into places that are hard to get into, is I had a friend who was a professor at Michigan University, and he got me, and he personally knew one of the chief librarians in there, and let me into a part of their secret part of their library that no one ever gets to go into. I don't think many people even know about this. They've got this big vault in Michigan University, and you open it up, and there's this big, huge door, and you go in, and it's an ancient manuscript room. It's
oh wow,
incredible, full of ancient manuscripts, and there's you know stuff from like the first century and second century, as you know Bible
sure,
manuscripts and things from everyday life, like school kids, Roman school kids, and Roman accountants,
sure, yeah,
doing adding up numbers on bits of paper, and there's an amazing diversity of stuff there. And when I saw that for the first time, this something went through my mind that I'd never thought about manuscripts, is that when you say compare sort of special manuscripts like, say, the Bible, versus just this everyday stuff,
mm-hmm.
like from the days of Roman commerce.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's just some Roman commercial document. There's a big difference between them. One of them is absolutely impeccably written, beautifully handwritten, and the other one is really sloppy.
Yeah,
It's a real mess. And so it's like you've got this Bible manuscript written absolutely uh, with perfection, and
uh-huh.
everyday writing is just really bad. And I never knew there was such a huge gap between the two things
Uh-huh.
back in those days.
Yeah,
So so this is relevant to the Voynich, because now when you look at the Voynich, it is so beautifully done, and so it's elevating it
mm,
to the level of a priceless manuscript, because
gotcha.
people in their everyday lives didn't write like that.
Uh,
That kind of writing is reserved for very special manuscripts that you want, to live on.
yeah, well, they didn't have printers back then, so they had to have people with practiced skill to, to
Yeah.
translate and dictate stuff. When I was in Ireland this last year, they were talking about there were various monasteries that we had run across, and they were talking about how there was sort of a network of monasteries where I mean, that's basically what the monks was they would just carry around all these documents and transcribe them from one onto the other and make copies of whatever was in this monastery, and then like go on to the next one. And that was just kind of like how they distributed information back then.
Human photocopiers.
Exactly, that's exactly what they were. Um, just like there used to be human computers. That was a job that people used to have. What you were saying about like the handwriting versus the books, it also makes me think of like I always wonder how people actually spoke versus how things were written back then. Because we don't really write the way that we speak, not necessarily unless you're writing a screenplay or something, but um, or a play where it's meant to be spoken. But the way we write is different from how we speak, and all we really have is how things were written back then. So were people really speaking like that, or what did the people actually sound like? That's what I always, because you can't really know that. We'll never really know that.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
interesting to me.
Maybe if we personal letters that people wrote each other, you might maybe closer to how they
Closer,
really
yeah,
spoke. Yeah, because when you're writing like a book, you tend to be
yeah.
more formal. That's right.
But what's funny is I even remember my grandmother used to write letters to me, and there were just little flourishes that she would put in there that she would never say in real life. She would say like I miss you, for I have not seen you in a while, or something like that. And I was like, what's this for stuff? You don't,
Let's say the word for.
no, you don't say for. It's very, yeah.
Yeah,
That always cracked me up. Anyway,
yeah, interesting.
well, I've kept you for way longer than I expected for us to go on. We usually go for about an hour, and you've been so generous with your time, and I really want to thank you for that.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Yeah.
This is really great. There was so much in here that I knew that you would come with the details, man. I was ready for it. I knew that that's what we were going to get into.
Yeah.
But anything else to point people toward or anything? I mean, you don't have any books coming out on this or anything, do you?
No time for that stuff.
Yeah, I imagine. Well, that was another thing. Was like it's everything. I always hear people talking about how everything feels like a scam these days, and I was kind of looking. I saw that you had written a couple of textbooks on, you probably use it in your class or something, but you're not monetizing this in any way. This is just a thing that you're doing because you were interested in it and you
even textbooks aren't very well monetized because textbooks don't really make that much. Well, you only do it for the love.
Mm-hmm. Well, as a student, when you see that your professor wrote the book, you're like, oh man. I can't get around this guy. He wrote the book.
That's right.
Well, anyway, we could keep talking about this forever, I'm sure. But I really wanted to thank you for doing this. This has been an absolute pleasure, and good luck with the Voynich manuscript stuff.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
take care.
Good Bye. Talking to you. Okay, that was amazing. I can't believe we got to talk for that long, and I'm super grateful to Professor Abbott for his time. So much cool info that came out of that. I hope you enjoyed it. Now, before you go, I am trying to get into the habit of pointing people toward my merch store because I actually do get asked a lot about it, but I don't talk about it very much on my channel. But yeah, I always wear those fun little nerdy shirts on my show. Well, you might know this, or you might not know this, but all those shirts are available for sale at my store. It's called answerswithjoe.com/store. There's branded shirts with my logo on them, also posters, mugs, stickers, a lot of different fun and nerdy designs that have nothing to do with my logo, but they might get a compliment or two from people who get it. Who knows? You might make a friend out of it. So yeah, go check it out. And if there's something on there you like on there, just throw some money down. It does really help support the channel, and then you'll get something cool out of it as well. So anyway, once again, that's answerswithjoe.com/store. Go have fun. This episode was produced by Kimmy Britt, edited by Bray Brown. I'm Joe Scott. You can find me at Answers with Joe pretty much everywhere on the socials. Of course, my YouTube channel is Answers with Joe. Anyway, thanks a lot for listening. Please do share this if you thought this was interesting. A nice review on whatever podcast player you're using right now goes a really long way. But until next time, thanks. Have a good one. Now go out there and start some conversations of your own. Take care.